Welcome back. I am so glad you're here with us today
Sure.
because we are stepping into a story that affects absolutely every single one of you listening.
It really does. It's foundational.
Right. When you close your eyes and picture the American family farm, what comes to mind? You probably see a legacy. You see generations of a family working the same soil, passing down knowledge.
Maybe a red barn.
Yeah, a red barn, a tractor, a golden field stretching out to the horizon. We all think we know that story. But right beneath our feet, entirely out of the public eye, that story's being aggressively rewritten.
It's a quiet takeover.
A quiet, massive takeover. American farmland is transitioning from a way of life, a vocation, into a Wall Street asset class.
And it really is a profound transformation. We are watching the ground that grows our food shift hands in a way that is, well, it's historically unprecedented for this country.
It really is.
It's moving away from the people who actually work the dirt and into the hands of holding companies, institutional investors, and massive capital pools. And the implications of that shift are staggering.
And that is exactly what we're going to dive into today. Today's deep dive is drawing from a fascinating stack of materials coming to us from Echoes from the Edge with the Lone Wolf.
Highly recommend checking those out, by the way.
Absolutely. We've got some incredibly hard-hitting excerpts in front of us. Essays with titles like Harvesting Capital, The Economic Erosion of the Modern Family Farm, and The Silent Reaping.
They do not pull their punches.
Not at all. So our mission today is to unpack all of this. We are looking at the financialization, the economic erosion, and the silent conquest of American farmland. Okay, let's unpack this. Where do we even begin to understand a shift this massive? How did we get from a family business to a Wall Street portfolio?
We have to begin by realizing that we aren't just looking at agricultural economics here. It's very easy to look at this through the lens of a business section in a newspaper, right? Yields, commodity prices, acreage values.
The spreadsheet stuff.
Exactly. But that misses the actual story. What we are looking at is a civilizational shift. It is a fundamental change in who controls the ground that sustains us. When you change the ownership of the land from a family who lives on it to a distant entity that only views it as a line item on a ledger, you alter the very foundation of how a society feeds itself.
That brings us perfectly into our first major area of focus today. We really need to talk about the mindset of land ownership, this journey from the soil to the spreadsheet. Because looking at the notes from Echoes from the Edge with the Lone Wolf, the contrast in how this land is viewed by the two different players in this drama is, it's stark.
It's night and day.
To a generational farmer, I imagine that land is highly specific. It's knowing that the northeast corner of the lower field always floods when it rains too hard, so you have to manage the drainage. It is a living memory of generational lessons.
Precisely. It's localized, place-based intelligence. The farmer views the land as a living organism that requires stewardship. But the new buyers entering this space, wealthy investors, massive hedge funds, real estate investment trusts, or REITs as they're called, they have a completely different paradigm.
They aren't looking at drainage.
No, not at all. To them, that exact same piece of land isn't about drainage or family history. It's about portfolio protection. It's an inflation hedge. It's about controlled scarcity.
Wow.
Yeah, they aren't looking at the biological health of the soil. They are looking at the financial security that owning a finite, tangible resource provides in an uncertain global economy.
I want to pause on that for a second because that introduces a dynamic the sources call a brutal asymmetry. I read the phrase rich on paper in the materials. What does that actually look like for a family farm right now?
It's a paradox that traps a lot of rural families. You have family farms that might be sitting on hundreds of acres of land that has skyrocketed in value.
Because of the outside buyers?
Right, because these outside investment funds are flooding into the rural market, driving up the price per acre. So technically, the farmer's net worth looks incredible on a balance sheet, but they have virtually zero operating cash.
Asset rich, cash poor.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is the massive mismatch in urgency between the farmer and the investor. The family farmer needs that land to produce a profitable crop right now, today.
They have bills to pay.
They have to pay for seed, for diesel, for the equipment loan this month. They desperately need liquid cash flow to survive the season.
So they are living season to season. But what about the institutional investor? If they are buying up the farm next door, don't they also need that land to turn a profit right away to satisfy their shareholders?
Not in the same way, no. And that is the asymmetry. The research from the USDA cited in our materials confirms this explicitly. Farmland buyers, these large funds, have a fundamentally lower urgency for immediate cash flow. They are perfectly willing to tolerate thin margins or even negative cash flows for years.
Wait, they are okay with losing money on the actual farming part of the farm?
Yes, because they're playing a completely different game. They
Right.
don't necessarily need the corn or the soybeans to make money this year. They just need the physical land to be worth more in 10 years.
Just sitting on it.
Exactly. They are betting on the long-term appreciation of the asset itself.
I want you, the listener, to really imagine this. Imagine you are sitting down to play a game of poker. Your survival, your family's survival, depends on you winning hands to pay for your groceries, your mortgage, your life.
High stakes.
Incredibly high stakes. But the opponent, sitting across from you, they have a massive stack of chips backed by a Wall Street pension fund, and the rules say they don't actually need to win a single hand of poker to eventually take all your chips.
They just wait.
They just have to outweight you. They could lose hand after hand after hand, and it doesn't matter to them because eventually you'll run out of money to play. That seems to be the exact reality for the modern family farmer competing against institutional capital.
That is a highly accurate way to frame it because the logic of finance and the logic of farming are entirely at odds. We see these terms in the text. The logic of finance rewards leverage and arbitrage.
Let's break those down.
Sure, for those who might not spend their days reading financial prospectuses, leverage is essentially using borrowed capital to multiply your potential returns. Arbitrage is taking advantage of a price difference between two or more markets. Finance thrives on these abstract, detached mathematical realities. It rewards precise timing and, above all, massive scale.
But farming can't be reduced to a math equation, can it? I mean, you can't arbitrage a
Oh,
draft.
that's really the point the sources are making. You cannot. The logic of farming rewards patience. It rewards memory. It requires biological adaptation to unpredictable natural forces. When you pit an abstract, well-funded financial system against a biological weather-dependent system in an open market, capital wins.
Always.
Finance can actually profit from market volatility. Farming has to physically, literally survive it.
So if this is a rigged game, what does the board actually look like on the ground? The materials from Echoes from the Edge with the Lone Wolf break this down into 6 specific pressures that are crushing the modern farmer.
Yeah, the 6 pressures.
And reading through this, we are talking about some of the hardest working people on the planet. But the math no longer honors their effort. Let's walk through these 6 pressures because it really paints a picture of how ordinary bad luck is transformed into permanent, fatal instability.
It is a stacking of pressures, as the texts describe it. A farmer might be able to handle 1 or 2 of these, but it's the combination that breaks the system. The first pressure is one we've touched on: rising land costs.
Right. So how does this actually squeeze the working farmer? If a farmer already owns their land, why do they care if the value goes up? Doesn't that help them?
You'd think so, but very few farmers own 100% of the land they work. To make modern farming economically viable, you need scale. So a family might own 500 acres, but they rent another 1,000 acres from neighbors or retired farmers just to produce enough volume to cover their overhead.
Ah, I didn't realize renting was so prevalent.
It's massive. The USDA farm finance work clearly shows that farmland rental conditions are absolutely central to a farm household's resilience. When outside capital floods into the market looking for stable, hard assets, it doesn't just drive up the purchase price of the land, it drives up the cash rent.
Oh, I see. So the farmer goes to renew the lease on the acreage they've been farming for 20 years, and suddenly the rent has doubled because a hedge fund bought the land and wants a higher yield on their investment.
Precisely. And if the farmer wants to buy that land to secure their future, they simply cannot compete in a bidding war against a multi-billion-dollar investment fund. The cost of gaining any breathing room becomes mathematically impossible to justify based on the actual price of the crops they are growing.
So the land itself is pricing them out. But while the bank account is being squeezed by the cost of the dirt, the second pressure falls from the sky weather volatility.
The great unpredictable variable.
Exactly. The text gets incredibly specific about this. I saw a term in the notes: heat units. The materials talk about needing exact heat units for a crop to mature. For someone who has never grown anything more complicated than a houseplant, what does that actually mean?
Heat units, or growing degree days, is a measurement of heat accumulation used by agriculturists to predict plant and animal development rates. Basically, a corn stalk or a soybean plant doesn't just need a certain number of days to grow. It needs a very specific accumulation of temperature over time.
So it's not just checking off days on a calendar.
No, not at all. If the spring is too cold, the seed sits in the ground and rots. If the summer is too hot too fast, the plant matures before it has actually produced a viable yield.
So farming is an entirely unforgiving dance with timing. You have incredibly narrow planting windows. You are constantly dodging frost risk, early freezes, sudden droughts, and floodwaters.
And when that biological timing breaks down, the financial budget shatters with it. The sources pull from NOAA disaster records and the USDA's weekly crop bulletins, and they paint a very clear, data-driven picture. Extreme weather events, chaotic cold shocks, and prolonged deep droughts are not isolated flukes anymore. They are recurring systemic stressors.
There's a very visceral example mentioned in the text that highlights just how severe this gets. In February 2026, the governor of Florida had to issue an emergency order specifically because of a bizarre combination of winter weather, extreme drought, and wildfire risks.
Yes, the Florida order.
The conditions were so chaotic that they actively threatened the state's entire agricultural survival. It wasn't just a bad week. It was an existential threat to the citrus and winter vegetable crops.
It's a perfect example of this pressure. And it's fascinating because when you look at the rural discourse captured in these materials, the explanations for why this weather is happening are split.
Right, there are different viewpoints out there.
Very different. You have people looking at the extensively documented records pointing to climate-related agricultural stress. But the sources also highlight that there is a growing contingent in some areas suspecting atmospheric intervention or manipulation.
It seems like people are just desperately trying to make sense of a sky that feels increasingly hostile to their survival.
Exactly. And the core takeaway from the sources isn't about solving that specific debate regarding the origin of the weather patterns. We're not here to endorse either side of that.
No, we just want to understand the impact.
Right. It's observing that regardless of what a person believes is causing the sky to act this way, the financial devastation on the ground is identical. The extreme swings in weather are an undeniable objective stressor.
The crops still die either way.
Exactly. A late freeze or a catastrophic drought ruins the crop and shatters the financial margin, leaving the farmer incredibly vulnerable to the first pressure we discussed, the financialized land market.
Which leads us directly into the third pressure. So the land is expensive, the weather is chaotic, and then we have high input costs.
Input costs are brutal right now.
I mean, I drive past fields and see these massive, incredible machines, the combines, the multi-row planters. With inflation and supply chain issues where they are, what does it actually cost a farmer just to plant a seed today?
It is a relentless drain. You don't just throw seeds in the dirt and wait for rain anymore. Modern farming is heavily industrialized. Let's take the machinery you mentioned. A new high-efficiency combine harvester can easily cost upwards of $800,000 to over $1 million.
$1 million?
For one machine.
That is absurd.
And it's not just the purchase price. These machines are packed with proprietary software. Often, a farmer isn't even legally allowed to fix their own tractor because the manufacturer has locked the software, forcing them to pay exorbitant dealership repair fees.
That's the right to repair movement, isn't it?
Yes, that is exactly what they are fighting against. So you have the staggering cost of machinery, plus the interest rates on the loans to buy that machinery. Then you add in the cost of diesel fuel to run it.
And what about the actual growing part, the seeds and the soil?
That's another massive layer of cost. The margins are eaten alive by the cost of genetically modified, patented seeds. You have to buy new seed every year. You can't just save it from the last harvest due to patent laws.
Oh, because the seed companies own the rights to the genetic makeup.
Exactly. Then you have fertilizer costs, which are highly volatile because they are often inextricably linked to global natural gas prices. Then there are the chemical treatments, herbicides, and pesticides.
So even if the weather cooperates and you have a great harvest and commodity prices look decent on paper, the expenses waiting at the end of the season can completely wipe out your gains.
It's a treadmill that never stops, and that feeds directly into the fourth pressure-magnified debt. Because of everything we just discussed, farming is an incredibly capital-intensive profession.
You need a lot of money just to start the year.
You have to borrow massive amounts of money up front, what's often called a spring operating loan, just to have the chance to grow a crop. You are using your land and your equipment as collateral.
I can see where this is going. Traditionally, if I understand rural history correctly, a family farm could survive a bad season. A drought hits, you tighten your belt, you go to the local bank, you renegotiate the terms, and you survive to plant again next year.
That was the historical model, yes.
Ugh.
But today, the debt loads are so phenomenally heavy because of the high inputs and the rising cost of land that a chain of bad seasons becomes fatal.
Just 1 or 2 bad years?
That's all it takes. The debt-to-asset ratios are stretched to the breaking point. The weather might ruin the crop, but the bank, often a large, distant financial institution, now still expects the payment. The debt does not stop just because it didn't rain.
That is terrifying. To put your entire family legacy up as collateral against the weather. Now, I know what a lot of people listening might be thinking. Wait, doesn't the government step in? What about farm subsidies? I read about the Farm Bill all the time.
Everyone brings that up.
Right. That brings us to pressure number 5, which the texts call the absolute limits of subsidies.
It is a vital point to clarify, because a public perception is very skewed here. Subsidies and federal crop insurance offer partial relief. They are designed to prevent total immediate collapse, but they do not provide full restoration.
So if a hailstorm wipes out a cornfield, the insurance doesn't make the farmer whole.
No, we need to define a term here: indemnities. An indemnity is essentially a payout from an insurance policy meant to compensate for a specific loss. If that hailstorm hits, the crop insurance indemnity might cut a check for a percentage of the projected lost yield.
Okay.
It might be enough to pay off the spring operating loan so the bank doesn't foreclose tomorrow.
But it doesn't give them a profit. It just gets them back to zero.
Often not even back to zero. It certainly doesn't cover the lost potential profit they needed to upgrade that $1 million combine or to pay the inflated rent on their leased acres. It doesn't stop the institutional investor from buying the farm next door. And crucially, it doesn't restore the lost time, the lost momentum, or the immense psychological and family stress of watching a year's worth of labor wither in a field. Subsidies are a tourniquet. They stop the bleeding for a moment, but they don't heal the underlying structural wound.
And that leads us to the 6th and final pressure outlined in the materials: local consolidation. If you have all these pressures, expensive land, chaotic weather, massive input costs, crushing debt, and limited government help, operations are going to fail. And when they fail, they get bought up.
Inevitably.
But what does that actually mean for the local community?
It means fewer and larger players end up controlling more of the land and the local infrastructure. In economics, we talk about monopolies, where there is only one seller. But rural consolidation often creates monopsonies.
Monopsonies.
Yes, where there is only one buyer. As the local agricultural economy becomes dictated by a handful of mega farms or distant corporate owners, the independent, smaller operators who are left lose all their leverage.
How does that play out on a practical level for the farmer?
Think about the local grain elevator, where farmers take their harvest to sell and store it. If independent elevators are bought out by massive multinational agricultural conglomerates, the local farmer suddenly has no negotiating power over the price they get for their crop.
Or the fees they pay for storage, I imagine.
Exactly. They lose leverage over transportation and supply contracts. They even lose their community influence. The local hardware store, the local equipment dealer, they all start to dry up because the mega farms negotiate bulk deals directly with the manufacturers.
Bypassing the town entirely.
Yes. The rural Main Street is hollowed out.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When you look at all 6 of these pressures laid out like this, you realize something profound. I'm looking at this list, and I don't see a single thing that points to a failure of the American farmer's work ethic.
Not at all.
This isn't about laziness or bad business sense. It looks like a system perfectly designed to reward scale, massive capital, and geographic detachment, while actively punishing the people who are biologically and generationally tied to the land.
That is the core tragedy the sources are illuminating. The system is structurally biased against the family farm, and understanding that structural bias leads us to a concept in the text that completely changes how we need to view agricultural policy in this country.
Look at that.
We have to deconstruct what they call the myth of subsidized prosperity.
Let's dive deep into that, because I think the general public, people living in cities or suburbs who only interact with farming at the grocery store, they see the headlines about farm subsidies. They hear about billions of dollars in federal crop insurance being authorized by Congress, and the assumption is that farmers are either doing incredibly well or that they are just a powerful lobby living off government handouts.
Right. It creates this illusion of abundance.
Yes,
It's arguably one of the biggest misconceptions in the public imagination regarding food production. The sources introduce a term to describe this reality, and I find it deeply unsettling but analytically perfect. Managed fragility.
Managed fragility. What does that mean in the context of a federal subsidy?
It means that the fact that the agricultural sector requires constant, massive federal intervention billions in subsidies, specialized tax measures, constant insurance indemnities, is not a sign of a healthy, prosperous industry.
It's the opposite.
It is a glaring symptom of an operating environment that is so inherently dangerous, so mathematically broken for the independent producer, that it requires constant federal stabilization just to prevent total overnight collapse.
And those highlight a specific detail about how the USDA views this. The USDA itself openly describes these premium subsidies and indemnity payments as core foundational parts of the system. It's not an emergency backup plan anymore. It's baked into the business model.
Exactly. The system is literally built around the expectation of recurring risk and recurring catastrophic losses. It's an acknowledgement that the free market, left to its own devices with current input costs and land values, cannot sustainably produce food without the producer going bankrupt.
It's like keeping a patient on permanent life support and calling them healthy just because the monitor shows a heartbeat.
That is a very apt comparison. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to analyze what these interventions are actually achieving in the long run. They are not saving traditional agriculture. They are merely slowing down its disappearance.
Just delaying the inevitable.
Yes. A farmer can receive a subsidy payout after a drought, but if their land rents are still crushing them, their proprietary machinery is breaking down, and the weather remains erratic, that subsidy just traps them in a long, slow, agonizing decline.
So they survive one season only to be just as vulnerable or perhaps even more leveraged the next spring.
Yes. And all the while, the investor class, the holding companies, the pension funds we talked about in the beginning they are watching, the system grinds down the tired, debt-ridden producer over a decade. Eventually, the family has to sell.
And the investors are right there waiting.
And the system rewards the investor who swoops in, buys the land, and uses it as a hard asset on a spreadsheet. Subsidized survival is not prosperity, it is managed collapse.
Managed collapse. That is an incredibly heavy phrase to process. It brings us to the human element of this entire shift. We've talked about the spreadsheets, the debt ratios, the input costs, but let's talk about the civilizational cost. What actually dies when the farm leaves the family? Because as the sources point out so beautifully, a farm is rarely just a business.
No, it is a living ecosystem of memory and tradition. To an outsider, an accountant sitting in a skyscraper in Manhattan, a farm looks like a collection of acreage. It looks like tax filings, yield numbers, equipment depreciation schedules, and a capitalization rate.
But to the family who lives there, that land is their identity. The texts mention that it might literally be a family burial ground. It's an inheritance. It is a physical manifestation of discipline, endurance, and generations of trial and error.
When that land is sold to a holding company, something profound and intangible is lost forever. You lose the local memory. We discussed place-based intelligence earlier, knowing exactly how a specific hillside retains water or how a certain microclimate affects the early frost.
You can't learn that from a book.
No, you lose the specific judgment that comes from knowing a piece of earth intimately for 100 years. You cannot rebuild that kind of knowledge on a spreadsheet. A holding company does not know the soil. They know the data output of the soil.
It makes me think of an analogy. It's like tearing down a deeply historic, curated library and replacing it with a massive server farm.
Yeah.
Sure, technically they both hold data, they both have information, but the soul is gone, the contextual wisdom of the librarian is gone.
That's a great way to look at it.
And what we're left with, according to the text, are the new lords of the soil. Who are these new lords?
The new lords of the soil don't arrive in the rural Midwest wearing overalls or work boots. They arrive through legal entities, through opaque capital pools, through layers of LLCs. And as the texts carefully note, we aren't suggesting that every outside buyer or farm management company is inherently malicious. It's not about cartoon villains.
Right.
It's that the entire framework of rural life changes.
Because the owner is suddenly elsewhere.
Precisely. The decisions regarding the land, how it is farmed, what is planted, how the local economy is engaged, those decisions are no longer made at a kitchen table looking out over the fields. They are made in a boardroom hundreds or thousands of miles away, often by an algorithm optimizing for quarterly returns.
That's chilling.
The physical horizon of the rural landscape might look exactly the same. You still see green corn or golden wheat, but the terms of life beneath it have been fundamentally altered. Ownership of a title deed does not guarantee stewardship of the land.
So what does this all mean? I want to speak directly to you, the listener. Maybe you are sitting in traffic in a major city right now. Maybe you've never set foot on a farm in your life, and your only interaction with agriculture is the produce aisle at the supermarket. Why should you care that the deed to a 1,000-acre farm in Nebraska just passed from a third-generation family to a massive hedge fund?
It is the most critical question we can ask because this isn't just an exercise in rural nostalgia. We aren't just mourning the loss of a quaint pastoral way of life. This is about control. The sources make a chilling macro-level point. Civilizations are incredibly fragile when the things that sustain life, like the biological production of calories, become abstractions in the hands of distant power.
Because at the end of the day, you can't eat a stock portfolio. You can't eat a capitalization rate.
Exactly. Food should be the most grounded, secure reality a nation possesses. But when farmland becomes a financialized asset, food itself drifts into the volatile logic of finance. This is fundamentally about food security. It is about a loss of national independence.
When you put it like that, it's a national security issue.
It absolutely is. When concentrated money, sometimes even foreign capital, can quietly buy up the foundation of our food supply, it gives distant, unaccountable entities unprecedented leverage over our very survival. If a hedge fund decides that fallowing the land or converting it to a different use provides a better return on investment than growing food, the local community and the nation loses that food production.
We have covered so much ground today. This has been an intense journey. We started by looking at that profound generational tie to the soil and how it is colliding head-on with the cold, hard math of financialized agriculture. We've unpacked the brutal asymmetry between the family farmer who needs cash flow to survive today and the institutional investor who only needs the land to appreciate over a decade.
We walk through the 6 immense pressures cornering the independent producer, from the skyrocketing land costs driven by Wall Street to the relentless, chaotic weather making biology unpredictable.
And we look at the staggering costs of proprietary inputs, the crushing weight of magnified debt, the hollow promise of limited subsidies, and the local consolidation that strips a community of its leverage.
We dismantled the public myth that subsidies means farmers are getting rich, revealing instead a federal system of managed fragility that expects failure. And finally, we looked at the terrifying reality of capital pools becoming the new lords of the soil, making boardroom decisions about the very food that sustains us.
It's a sobering reality, undoubtedly, but understanding the mechanics of this shift is the crucial first step. And I want to leave you, the listener, with one final, lingering thought to ponder as you go about your day. We've established today that farming requires deep, place-based intelligence, memory, and biological adaptation to survive the physical world. Conversely, we've seen that finance profits from abstraction, volatility, and massive scale.
2 completely different languages.
Exactly. So consider this. If the entirely unpredictable, violently chaotic forces of nature, like the escalating billion-dollar weather disasters continually tracked by NOAA, continue to intensify in the coming decades,
What happens then?
what happens to our literal physical survival when the people holding the deeds to our entire food supply only know how to manage risk on a spreadsheet, but have absolutely no idea how to actually coax life out of the dirt? That is a question we all need to be asking as we look at the future of our food. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Echoes from the Edge with the Lone Wolf. Keep questioning the world around you, keep looking beneath the surface of the headlines, and we will see you next time.